record on this computer. Yeah, here we go. Share screen. What? I know now you're seeing a little Zoom screen, but it doesn't do anything. Okay, this is the PowerPoint. So many little pieces here. I wish I could be smoother at this. All right, here we go. This is a they say, I say essay. So you're joining a conversation. It needs to be based on, I know you can see Milo right there. So funky. Okay, so it's a they say, I say essay. It's important that the things that you say are connected to what your text says. So you have to show that connection. Koenig says this, and I say, yeah, I saw that too. Or Christoph says this, but I haven't quite seen the same thing. Or Callie Linfor talks about being afraid and needing to survive. And I felt the same way. And so you're basing this on the author's text. You want to keep everything relevant. It's like relevance is sort of like if I asked, what are the best things about living in San Diego? And you might say the weather, you might say the zoo, you might say the people, but you don't say the Eiffel Tower, or you don't just suddenly start talking about Alaska, because that wouldn't be relevant. Are there some ways that you could make it relevant? Maybe, but you'd have to do a lot of steps to get there. And it's important that you are joining the conversation. Also important that you have a clear main point that's based in the text that you're responding to, and that you organize all your ideas around. So let's talk a little bit more about that. I'm asking you to revise your essay. Do you need to edit your essay too? Well, yes, but revise first. Clearly, I'm differentiating between these two ideas. Revising is making everything sound better. It's reorganizing paragraphs, realizing that some ideas are not relevant and you need to add more ideas to make it relevant. It's changing words, it's adding sentences that increase your analysis, it's adding descriptions, so you're doing more showing than telling, maybe even adding examples and developing those examples. It's making sure that you're following a thesis, maybe even adding a thesis. This is what revision is. Editing is what you might do right at the end. Adding the commas, fixing capital versus lowercase letters, running a spell check, indenting paragraphs, making sure everything is MLA appropriate. So revising is making it sound better, making it follow the prompt better, making your ideas clearer, and editing is just fixing up surface level things. Quite honestly, you can have all the surface level things perfect and still only get a C in this essay. And you can have some editing problems and you can still get an A in this essay. I haven't finished reading all your essays yet. I will finish those tonight or early tomorrow morning at the very latest. We have a due date that starts on Saturday but goes all the way to Wednesday. So even if I don't finish reading your paper until tonight, you still have a full week to revise. And that's a lot of time. It's time to create a revision plan. It's time to visit the Writing Center. It's time to visit me, to make an appointment to see me on Monday during my office hours. It's time to really tackle and think about this paper. So take notes on whatever your peers have said, take notes on whatever I have said, and create a plan for what you're going to do to make your essay stronger, to make your ideas stronger. Also, as you're thinking about your essay and your revision plan, think about, I'm trying to get help. Nobody can help me. Nobody can help me. Okay. I needed to, I said, take a look at the, okay. I apologize profusely. I can't, there we go. Take a look at the grading rubric. This is our screen. And in order to find the grading rubric, you want to go to modules and go to the final draft submission link. It's right here. This is where you submit your paper, but this is where you find out how I'm grading it. It's worth 200 points, and your MLA formatting is worth 20 of those points. So go back over those kinds of details and make sure you're following all the things and that your citations, your works cited page are correctly done. Your introduction is worth 30 points. Here's what I consider excellent, and here's what I consider like D level. Pay close attention to those things. Your organization, your cohesion, the they say, I say paragraphs, the body of your essay. I'm looking at those. I'm also looking at your rhetorical strategies. Now, I will say that I don't always recognize, you're highlighting things, but I'm not always recognizing that those are rhetorical strategies. To me, they just look like sentences. Sometimes they're sentences that reference the text you're responding to, but they're not narratives, they're not meta discourse, they're not examples, they're just sentences. And so you're going to need to be able to highlight them and label them for what they are. And then editing is worth 10%. So if you have frequent errors or some of your sentences are hard to follow, you'll still get 13 points. So it's important that you recognize that editing is not the most important thing. Questions about the grading rubric? While we're looking at Canvas, I want to show you. I want to show you an assignment that comes in when you're done with your essay. I want you to write a letter to me. And this letter allows you to reflect on what you've done. So just write, Dear Erin, or Dear Mrs. Flewelling, or however you want to address it. And then you're going to write multiple paragraphs. I want you to tell me your main argument, and I want to tell me how you're developing it. I want you to talk about what you're most proud of in your paper and why. And I want you to describe the parts of your paper that you're not sure about. I also want you to talk about the rhetorical strategies you used. This paragraph will help me understand what you're doing in your essay. In fact, all these paragraphs help me to understand what you're doing. When I'm grading, I'm analyzing your paper. I'm trying to look at it and say, what is the author trying to do here? What is the author doing well? I'm not just looking at it and saying, wow, that's just wrong. No, I'm trying to understand what you're doing well, what you're attempting to do, as well as what you're doing. And so this letter to me shows me your awareness about what you're doing, how you're doing it, why you're doing it, and even your reflection on what you need to do better shows me your learning process. And so how long should this letter be? At least 300 words. So I really want you to put some time into this. It might be longer than that. And I know sometimes when you're analyzing something like your own writing, it could be longer than that. So any questions about this assignment? Amanda asks how we can make sure that we're using rhetorical strategies. Is there any way we can check and make sure that we're actually using them? That's a really good question, Amanda. I named some rhetorical strategies. I named exemplification, using examples. What I would suggest that you do is in this letter, say, I think I'm using exemplification. I looked at, Amanda, I think you're responding to Kelly Lynn for. Yeah, I could be wrong. And you could say, on her 4th page, she does this. I'm trying to do this. Even if you, or if somebody were responding to Christoph, in his 4th paragraph, he refers to a big name and authority. I'm following his same pattern by using a big name and authority here. And by using the big name and authority, I am lending credibility to my claim. Does that answer the question, Amanda?
Yes, kind of. So, for example, he uses like that, or he refers to somebody from the Pew Research Center. I'm doing Christoph.
Okay.
So I would reference back to that person.
Well, I would, okay, so if that's a big name and authority, you could refer to that big name and authority. And so you're going to have to set it up. Look at how he uses it, make your own claim, and then use that author to support your claim. But you're going to have to say, Christoph says this. I don't think I answered that question really well.
I think I understand what you mean.
Okay. And definitely this letter right here will help me follow any of you. Really, I want to know, I'm not expecting any of your essays to be absolutely perfect. I've actually seen some that they're going to be really strong papers, but I'm not expecting anybody to be a professional writer right at this moment in time. I will be pleasantly surprised if you are, but I'm not expecting that. And so by analyzing your paper and showing me what you're trying to do, I will see your progress. And this letter is really, really helpful for me. So in some cases in the past, when I have students write a letter like this, I actually improve their grade because it helps me analyze their papers. So don't forget to do this. In fact, I won't grade your paper until you have done it, until it's past the due date, and then I grade your paper in case you haven't done it. Any other questions about the grading rubric or this while we're here and I can access these so easily. Okay. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. You should have a title, and it should be an original title. And it should lead readers in the direction that your essay is going. This is, if we think about cohesion, which is, like how an essay follows one thought from beginning to end, and all the ideas connect to each other, cohesion starts with the title. This is where you start guiding your audience. And we've seen this in every single thing that we've read this semester, all the way from E. Shelley Reid's title, 10 Ways to Think About Writing, Metaphoric Musings for College Writing Students. Now that you've read it, you go, oh yes, she's totally telling us what to think. Callie Linfor, The Literacy of the Hillside Strangler, and Anything Extra We Know, Joyous Survival. We see that. Koenig, What I Found in Standing Rock, every single title we read, even They Say, I Say, it's telling us as readers what to expect. That's what your title should be doing. And it needs to be original. It should not be essay about Callie Linfor's essay. Not original. I've actually had that title before. I've also had essay 1 many times. And so if you don't have an original title, let's say you have an excellent introduction, it will get knocked down to almost excellent, very good. If it was very good and you don't have an original title, it will get knocked down to good. So this impacts your grade. By the way, while we're talking about title, I want to note that you should be using MLA title capitalization, and you should be using Times New Roman 12-point font, no italics, no quotation marks. It's not in bold, not in bigger letters. There are no extra spaces between your heading and your title and your title and your text. That won't lose you points off your introduction, but it will lose you points off of MLA formatting. So make sure that you're looking at your title before you submit this. As you're thinking about revision, you want to think about making sure you have all the required parts of the essay. You need to know where your introduction is. You need to know that you have at least 3 body paragraphs. You need to think about how long are my body paragraphs, because if you have one really long body paragraph, that's the entire essay, you will lose points. How long should a paragraph be? Well, E. Shelley Reid says that there is no single length for a body paragraph. It needs to be long enough to develop the ideas. And if it gets really, really long, you need to think about, where can I break it up? How can I guide my audience? Do you have a conclusion? I read at least one essay yesterday that the last paragraph was a wonderful paragraph, but it further developed the thesis. And so there really wasn't a conclusion. I want to talk about the introduction, which is worth 15% of your grade. Clearly, I value introductions. You should have a hook, something that's engaging the reader. Might be a question that guides the reader into the topic, could be a shocking fact or statement, a general topic. I've seen at least one author that used a really strong epigraph, a quote that invited me in to the topic that the author was having about how difficult situations can help us discover new things. It was really, really powerful. Your introduction should include quick background information about the article that you're responding to. That introduction should include the author's full name and credibility. For example, Native American basketball player Bronson Koenig, or SDSU professor Callie Linfor, or, sorry, I'm totally, columnist, New York Times columnist, Nicholas Kristof. Notice that I'm just putting 2 or 3 words in front of the author's name and then the author's full name. That's the easiest way to do it. The title of the text, where it was published, and when it was published. And then a short summary that introduces what the author is discussing. Now, the author is discussing lots of things. Your summary is specifically chosen for the way that you're going to respond to the text. Kristof talks about the Hispanic paradox, this idea that Hispanics live longer than other people, white people and Black people specifically. But he also talks about reasons why we can learn from them. And he says those reasons might be an explanation for the Hispanic paradox. But if you're not talking about the Hispanic paradox and you're just talking about how Hispanics have really strong family ties, you may not need to mention the Hispanic paradox. Or that might be a supporting body paragraph. Think about what you're focusing on in your essay. And if you say, I just want to respond to everything, I'm going to say, I saw a lot of essays like that. That there was just a they say, I say paragraph, a they say, I say paragraph, a they say, I say paragraph, but there was no single main point. There has to be a single main point. That's what an essay does. And so you want to think about how can you summarize the text in a way that represents your focus. And then you have an I say, 1 or 2 sentences that guide readers into how you're going to join that conversation. And it's important that you have that. You'll notice that I really only had 2 sentences on that, maybe 1. And then I had my thesis. These things, the they say and the I say, they need to be relevant. There needs to be some sort of connection. You might add a sentence about how it's connected. And then you have a thesis. This is your main point. You're guiding it. It's probably something about what you learned. So it's not just, you can't just say, or you should not just say, and I agree with Koenig, which is what I'm going to talk about in my paper. Because you could say Koenig is right that it's important to learn more about our heritage because it will help us stay connected and learn how we can live our lives. Do you see how it's very much, I need to not just agree with an author, but I need to say what I'm agreeing with and why it matters. You were joining the conversation, but not in a general way. I agree with everything he says, or it's a focused way. And it includes a why it matters. This is really, really important because this is the development of your essay. Thesis statements can be difficult. And I made sure that I commented on your thesis statements in the essay, in my comments. For some of you, that is a future statement, but it will definitely be there. In your body paragraphs, and remember, your body paragraphs are a huge, huge part of your grade. Not only am I assessing, are you doing they say, I say in those body paragraphs, and that is worth 30 points. I'm also grading, is everything cohesive? Your thesis all the way to the end of the paper, including those body paragraphs. That's worth 50 points, I think. So in your body paragraphs, you're introducing concepts or examples from your article and responding with concepts or example, your own stories. You're describing both of these things and showing how they're linked, whether they're similar or they're different. In other words, you need to show or don't just, and not just tell. And you can't just assume your readers are going to figure out what you're talking about if you haven't shown them. You need to make this really clear how you're connecting the they say to the I say, as well as how you're developing your thesis. Don't make me figure it out. I am not a mind reader to have an allusion to E. Shelley Reid. This is really important. This is important to your grade, and this is important to you understanding what essays do. Any questions there?
So for my essay, I kind of have like I did the intro they say to talk about the Hispanic paradox, but my essay, it doesn't focus on like that part of the they say. So would I like have to talk about like the specific like cultural aspect of Christoph's article then in the they say?
What what is your thesis, Amanda?
I was basically talking about how I learned very similar things that Christoph learned about Hispanic culture, but for me it was growing up in Rosarito, and like that's like basically what my whole essay is about.
So to me, Amanda, that seems like an essay that's Christoph says I should learn from them. He says that Hispanics have wonderful characteristics and that I should learn from them. And indeed, my life growing up in Mexico taught me these same things that I've been able to put in my life.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you may not need to talk about the Hispanic paradox. If your essay is, Christoph says they have great family ties, and yes, this is what I saw in Rosarito, and this is what I'm trying to do in my family, in my own life. Or he says they're super community oriented. This, like he describes what he saw. I saw the same thing in Rosarito. And I see the same thing living in Chula Vista. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions about this idea? Now I'm really interested to read your paper, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to address this as well. Sometimes I see students who are introducing Linfer or Koenig or Christoph, and they're misrepresenting their ideas. And it's important that you read carefully so that you understand. So the Hispanic paradox is not the same as commitment to family. Koenig's connection to Native Americans didn't begin at Standing Rock. It began when he met the professor who challenged him to learn more about his heritage. Remember, he felt disconnected growing up. He didn't like going to the reservation. It was strange for him because he grew up in the city. And he felt like he wasn't really Indian, but he wasn't really American because his friends would ask silly questions like, do you sleep in a teepee? And it wasn't until he got to college and a professor said, hey, I know you're Ho-Chunk. Did you know? And starts asking him questions and becomes his mentor. He doesn't have a mentor, a Native American mentor, until he's in college. And so it's important that you understand the text because you've got to represent their ideas accurately. You can't just say, I disagree with Christoph because I've seen Hispanic Americans drink too much. He's saying, statistically, across the United States, they drink less. He's not saying all communities, all Hispanics. And so it's important to know what he's saying so you don't misrepresent him. You can say, yeah, maybe that's true statistically, but in some communities, it's not true. So pay close attention to his claims. Now, when you quote them, make sure you frame each quotation successfully. You've got context, you're introducing the quote, you're explaining it and showing why it matters. Look at the verbs you're using to introduce them. Are you reminding the authors, your readers, of the author's main point and tying it to yours as you go along? This is really important. Questions about this as we're pausing on this idea? Stay connected to your pink house. That is your main idea. Refer back to it, keep your readers with you. When you get to the conclusion, sometimes students think that the conclusion should just repeat everything you just said. It's sort of a conclusion, a good conclusion, definitely emphasizes the thesis. And it might tie ideas together, but it also indicates why what you learned matters. Sort of like, here's a so what. Here's by, I'm going to go back to Amanda because I remember her essay quite well right now because we just talked about it. Is like, she might say, growing up in Rosarita added richness to my life. I truly did learn from the Latinx community that I lived with, and it's made my life better. So we should all learn from Hispanic Americans. I don't know. That's where she might go. I don't know what she said. So yet, I will know. All right. Any questions about revision before we move on? So as I was reading, I started finding examples of plagiarism. Now, I don't believe for a second that any of the students in which I saw this intended to plagiarize. Plagiarize is like copying. And it's a scary word because I don't think any student wants to be accused of plagiarism. But I did see examples of it. I don't know if I saw them in this class. I know that I saw them in the other class. And this was unintentional plagiarism. It was not on purpose. And yet it's still plagiarism. Students may not realize that if they have ideas or thoughts borrowed from published or unpublished works, that they have to be cited. So they're quoting maybe 3 words but they're 3 unique words from a text, but they're not 3 to 5 to 6 unique words, phrases from a text. And they're not putting quotation marks around them. They're representing as their own phrases. And that is plagiarism. So if you've got a 3-word phrase, you've got to use that's unique to that author. You have to use quotation marks. And I see some students are using entire sentences, but they might change every 3rd or 4th word, but that's still plagiarism. The sentence structure belongs to that author. The unique claim belongs to that author. Be very careful. I want your writing. And you might say to yourself, but that sounded so good. It really did. That's why all these authors got paid for what they wrote. But the goal here is for you to learn to write better. And so it's important for you to use your own words. You are using quotation marks when you are quoting, but you should have quotation marks around those quotes. And then you're going to analyze what authors said. I am using a plagiarism detector on the final essay. I wish I'd used it on the rough draft, so you would have reminders. I did not. When I recognize the words and phrases, I do make note of that. I've taught Callie Lindforth's text multiple times, and so I catch those pretty easily. Christoph's text is so short that I catch those pretty easily. I don't know Koenig's text as well, and so I don't always catch those. But the plagiarism detector will. And so be very, very careful that you do that. I haven't seen anything that seemed intentional. Intentional is where you're just presenting someone else's works, thoughts, or ideas as your own. I have seen those in essays, but not this essay. And I'm really happy about that. It would be hard to do that in this essay, honestly. Any questions about plagiarism? Okay. A few editing tips. And by the way, don't worry about the edit. I sort of edit as I go along. I hate the little squiggly lines that Word gives me underneath my words and phrases. Those bother me immensely, and so I just fix them. But I'm a strange person in that sense. Here's a few tips you can use as you're editing before you submit this. Run spell check and grammar check. You can do those on Word, you can do those in Google Docs. It's pretty effective. Yeah, it's pretty effective. It won't always catch things. For example, I was reading essays on Sunday, and I saw a student use pray, P-R-A-Y, but they meant P-R-E-Y, which is to prey upon somebody, to take advantage of them, not to prey upon someone, like sort of say, dear God, please bless them. Very, very different ideas. And so I just marked it and I said, do you mean pray? P-R-E-Y. Spell check won't catch that. So you have to pay attention to those things. And I am aware of that, but you need to pay attention to those. But do run spell check and grammar check. Won't catch everything, but it can help. Another thing that I suggest is that if at all possible, so the essay's due, it becomes late after Wednesday, 11:59 p.m., finish it at 9 p.m. and then come back to it at 11 o'clock with fresh eyes, because that will help you catch missing words, commas, words, things that incomplete thoughts. I tend, we get so caught up in our ideas that we might not notice things that we do notice if we come back later on. A friend of mine teaches English at a high school, and she gave me a trick that I've used in my own writing, which is reading from the bottom of the page up. So go to the sentence, the last sentence, and read that one, and then read the next one and the next one. Why do we catch it better? Because we're not reading in context, because our mind tends to fill things in. Because we know the ideas. And so if we're reading from the bottom of the page up, our mind isn't playing those tricks on us like it might. Common error types are capitalization errors. Basically, in English, we capitalize the first word of a sentence, we capitalize proper names, proper nouns. So Mrs. Flewelling is my name. So Mrs. and Flewelling get capitalized. If you wrote, she is a professor, professor would not get capitalized because you're not using it as my name. So those are capitalization errors. On social media, we often capitalize things just to add emphasis, but we don't do that in academic writing. Also, there are some differences with things that get capitalized in different languages. I'm aware of that. I studied French for a lot of years, and so I'm aware of that in French, but I've observed this in Spanish also. So keep in mind, this is English rules. Comma splices, that is joining a series of sentences with commas or without commas. Keep in mind that we use end of punctuation and make sure that you're using commas after introductory clauses. You might say, according to Lynn for, and then you would put a comma after that. Or in addition, and a comma goes after that. Keep in mind subject-verb agreement. I've seen a lot of fragments. That's where there's a sentence without a subject. And if there is no subject, you have created a fragmented sentence. And so make sure that you have that. The Writing Center can help you with revision. It can help you with your thesis. It can help you with cohesion, adding those words, those connecting words and phrases that we talked about last week. The Writing Center can help you with all of those things. It can also help you with MLA. And I've put together 2 videos for you on MLA. So I don't want to talk a lot about things. You can refer back to those, and the Writing Center will help you with this also. But I do want to remind you basics. The biggest thing I want to talk about is no extra spaces anywhere. So a lot of students, look at this example over here. A lot of students are putting extra spaces between the heading and the title and the title and the text. And that is frowned upon, and it will keep you from getting an excellent on your MLA formatting. Also, there are no extra spaces between paragraphs, and we do indent in the first line of every paragraph. Do not forget to add your Works Cited page. And I believe this is the very last slide of this slide deck. I know that's an awful lot of information. Revision can be more difficult, I think, than revision can seem more difficult than actually writing the paper, because like writing the paper, you just throw everything on there, and revision means you have to go in and reorganize and restructure and think about how to develop and streamline all the ideas. Do you have questions for me, any of you? Yeah, Ezekiel?
I had a question regarding how we're gonna do the works cited page because I found additional sources from my essay, and they were like co-authors. So there were 2 different authors who wrote the same paper. So I wrote it kind of like backwards. So the first author's last name, first name, and the other author's last name and then first name. Is that the correct way to do that, or how would I properly do that?
So in MLA,
Mm-hmm.
that's almost right,
Okay.
but not quite. So you would say, let's say you and I wrote a paper
Okay.
together, and it on the text, it said Ezekiel Herrera and Aaron Flewelling. So now we have to create the citation. And so we would say Herrera, comma, Ezekiel, comma,
Mm-hmm.
and Aaron Flewelling.
Okay.
So it's last name, comma, first name, comma, and first name, last name, period.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, good question.
All right. Thanks.
Any other questions?
This isn't a question, but for the like paraphrasing and like avoiding the what is it called when you copy? Plagiarism.
Yeah.
I found a website that like helps you. It's like a paraphrase machine, just to like help you avoid. So like I'll put it in the chat if anybody needs it. It's called Quillbot.
Does it write the sentences for you, Amanda?
It basically just like kind of like rewords like a sentence. So like for example, like I was having trouble. It was kind of like a simple sentence that I didn't want to like copy. I just was just trying to figure out how to summarize it, and I just kind of like rewords it.
Well, then I would be very careful about that sentence. It'll help you not get caught with a plagiarism detector. But if you're copying the computer's paraphrase, you're still not writing and doing that work yourself. So I would rather, even if you don't think it sounds as nice the way you're paraphrasing, I would rather have you do it yourself. A secret that I've found, or a trick that I've found, is if you read an idea and you go, I want to put this in my own words. I cover up the text and I write it out by hand, what I remember that it said, the idea that it said. or type it on a screen. So I don't look at it, I just go from memory. I make sure I understand it, and then I write down my own thought on what it means. I know that this is really hard to do. It is crazy hard. And keep in mind, I understand about unintentional plagiarism, and I'll remind you, but if this is not a blatant thing, I will notice it. Also, computers, when they do this, they can often make things sound really funky. And I really, really want you all to wrestle with this. It's horrible. I do understand. I have been I have been in a class like your class, and the one that we're taking right now together, and I know how hard it is to do this kind of writing. Other questions? Amanda, did that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense.
Yeah, I know it's so hard. Thank you for introducing me to that site, though. Ezekiel?
Okay, so I'm not like super familiar with the art of quoting, I guess you can say. So basically, with all my my quotes, if they're just in quotation, I mean I introduce the author, the credibility, then I'll put in the quote. But do I need to put in like the paragraph name or the name of the essay or what they wrote in quotations right after I quote from there?
If there are page numbers, then you put the page number.
Okay.
That's called in-text documentation, and we haven't talked about it much
Okay.
for this essay because um, except for Lin4, there are no page numbers, and so we haven't
Yeah.
had to focus on that. So what I would suggest, Ezekiel, is that you introduce the text, the author, the credibility, and then give one sentence or two sentences of context first, and then add the quote.
Okay.
And then you say, he says.
All right.
Think back to the example that we talked about in class, where we didn't talk about it in class. It was an activity for
Okay.
about quotation where there was a good example and a bad example,
Mhm.
and you all had to analyze. And it was about Susan Bordeaux, and how everybody said, we don't even know what she's talking about. Yeah, that was the issue.
Okay.
Other questions?
So every time I do introduce a quote, because Christoph, he kind of just says like, oh, this person who works here says this. Like every time I quote somebody, it needs to have where they wrote
Oh,
their article from.
if you're quoting Christoph, if you're quoting a quote that Christoph quotes, you want to indicate Christoph provides an
Yeah.
example of Francis.
Hmm.
Francis said,
Yeah.
then you're fine. Yeah.
Okay. But like for additional sources, would that be the same way? Would I have to say where their article was published? Because
Uh-huh.
okay, yes, okay,
Yeah.
all right.
I know nobody can see my head nod. The little
Okay,
tabs are so small,
okay.
unless you have a massive screen. Are any of you watching this on your phones? I'm so happy to hear that. That would be so hard. Oh, Yura is what? Oh, and Amanda's watching.
Uh,
Oh my gosh, that that's so. Oh, you really are. Oh my gosh, that makes it really hard. So, is it useful to have the slide deck available to use to go back over it? Yeah, I started adding that just a couple of weeks ago. If there's anything I can do to help you, please let me know. I take for granted that I have that little 15-inch screen, um, and I forget that some of you are working on your phones or tablets, and so when we talk about thumbnails, you all really are like not even as big as a thumbnail on a screen. Any other questions before we wrap up? All right, then I'm done. Um, you're free to go. I'm going to stop the recording. And if you want to stick around and ask questions after, I will be happy to stick around here and ask questions.